cloud. All right. Hello, listeners. I'm Laura Humm. I'm one of the Dialogue Doctor editors, and I'm very fortunate today to have Lisa Young here with me. Lisa gave me a piece from her, would you call it sci-fi
I would.
fantasy?
Science fiction, yes.
Excellent, excellent. Well, Lisa, why don't you tell us a little bit about yourself and your writing journey before we get into kind of where the piece is?
Yeah, sure. So I've had a nonfiction blog for several years, and I've always wanted to write fiction. And I finally started with NaNoWriMo in 2019 when I drafted this book that we're going to be talking about today for the first time. And then I went on and I wrote out the drafts for books 2 and half of book 3. And then I went back to book 1 and rewrote it. And now I'm rewriting it again for the third time. But I feel like it's so much better now. Yeah, definitely. I just want to say that I've learned so much from you and Jeff with the Dialogue Doctor, and I feel like it's really changed my whole story in such a positive way.
Oh, well, we're so honored that we could be part of that journey with you. We actually have had a couple of other authors on recently who have said they've done similar things where they had a draft and then they wrote another draft and now they're kind of in their third draft of it, and that they're getting to a place now where they really feel like as a fiction author, they're starting to learn some things that they could actually apply on a larger scale. So it kind of sounds like that's where you are too.
Yes, that's exactly it. That's how I feel.
Excellent, excellent. And your nonfiction blog, do you want to share that with the listeners?
Oh, sure. It's eatspeakthink.com. I'm a medical speech language pathologist. So this website is for people who have trouble with communication, swallowing, or cognition.
Wonderful. That is such a noble and difficult profession. When I was a teenager, I used to babysit for a family, and the mother was a speech language pathologist.
Oh.
And I just remember I would go with her so I would watch her son while she was working with clients, and just like she would tell me a little bit about what her job was. And it's such an interesting field. So,
Yes, it's challenging, but very rewarding.
yeah. Well, I hope some of the listeners are able to jump over to your blog and see and learn a little bit about what you do.
Oh, thank you.
Yeah. Now, does that speech and language pathology and teaching lean any into or influence at all your sci-fi writing?
It really, yes, it does. So Nora is a brain scientist, and she's working on trying to cure memory, specifically her brother's memory loss.
Okay, so a lot of that sciencey background comes from your knowledge.
Hmm.
Well, that's exciting. That makes Nora come to life just even a little bit more than she did on the page.
Oh, cool.
So, why don't you tell the listeners a little bit about what your book is about? And then we can kind of talk about the chapter you gave me.
Okay, sure. Okay, so Nora is mid-20s. She's a neuroscientist, so a brain scientist, and she's a twin. And her brother is an actor and a bit of a daredevil, and he's had a number of head injuries since his teenage years. So he has some memory issues and the potential of developing chronic traumatic encephalopathy, which is what football players and boxers and other athletes may be at risk for. So that's her goal. And she's working at a premier institution that has a secretive side to it. And at the beginning of the story, their father has kind of gone missing. So in the search for their father, she discovers some completely unexpected truths about herself and her brother and their place in the universe. Actually, no one on Earth knows that there is life out there, but there is in my story. And she discovers a way to potentially save or protect Earth against external threats.
Well, that is definitely a very intriguing summary that tells us so much about what your book is about. I'm so excited about that. And the chapter you gave me is about 8 chapters in. So we've met Nora, we've met her brother, we've learned a little bit about the organization that she works for.
Mhm.
And now we're meeting some new characters for the first time.
Mhm.
Okay. So um, it also felt like as I was reading this chapter, this is like the turning point for Nora. It's almost as if she has a big decision to make, and yet the decision has kind of been made for her.
Okay. I'm very interested in your perspective on this because, yes, so this scene was intended to be Nora's call to adventure that
Mhm.
she denies. So that's like the story
Okay.
element. Um, and I'll just let you know that so when I call this a scene because I'm picturing location,
Mm-hmm.
not what happens. So this
Sure.
scene was actually more like 3,200 words when I wrote it. So I had to find a place to cut it to send it to you. So it wasn't too
Mhm.
long. Um, yeah, and I realize now I did not cut it in the right place.
That's okay. I actually think what you gave me is really great. And hearing you say that you're thinking about scenes based off of location rather than emotional arc actually um, gives me a lot of insight into kind of what you're going for here. Because it did really feel like, as a reader, there were like two or three big kind of acts that were happening in this moment.
Yes.
Um, so why don't you tell me a little bit about what you want your reader to feel in this scene, either from the location or breaking it down more into a traditional scene?
Okay, yes. So, the very beginning of the scene, Nora is kind of irritated and concerned that Xander has injected the neuro nanobots into her brother before she had a chance to look at the research and kind of approve it, um, which I think is part of the previous scene, so that probably shouldn't be part of this.
Mm-hmm.
So I'd like the reader to kind of be curious at meeting Kira, who's the director of the secretive company Longev, which
Mm-hmm.
is the parent company of what Nora works for and where they're located. So Kira is visiting. And then I'd like the reader to kind of feel kind of irritated or maybe a little indignant at Kira's dismissal of Nora at the beginning.
Mm-hmm.
And then as the scene goes on, Kira starts to really um, give this like inquisition of Nora about what she knows about Longev and about them, because no one's really,
Mm-hmm.
they don't want anybody knowing anything. So I'd like the reader to kind of be like maybe confused by that, maybe a little more concerned, about why they're so secretive. And then Xander, throughout the scene, he's kind of stepping in and kind of like calming Kira down in a way. Uh,
Mm-hmm.
and so I'd like the reader to be kind of suspicious about what he's up to, like what's going on there. And then the messenger comes in, and the messenger is going to play a huge role in the story. So this is his first introduction, and
Mm-hmm.
he comes in bearing this urgent message. And so I feel like I'd like the reader to kind of be curious about what this message is, especially because it causes such a huge change in Kira's attitude and treatment of Nora. And then, and I realize my emotions are all over the place, but this is what I'm thinking. And then I'd like the reader to kind of be a little excited alongside of Nora that here's this powerful person working for this awesome company who seemingly is offering to Nora on a silver tray what she needs to cure her brother, with the quick realization that if it sounds too good to be true, it probably is. And how does this company have access to the drug and to technology that really doesn't exist yet?
Mm-hmm.
And so that's where it kind of ends, where Nora's saying, like, no, you won't even tell me where you're located, so I can't, you know.
Okay, so a lot happening in this scene. I'm going to go ahead and share my screen here with you.
Okay.
Um, so as we're looking at this, That's a lot of emotions that we are thinking about as it relates to the users, or excuse me, the reader. I do that all the time. The reader's journey through here. There's some frustration, there's some confusion, there's some anxiety, there's a little bit of like hope, and then there's like pulling the rug out from under them, and there's some suspicion in there. That's a lot. Now, it's not too much, but what we want to make sure is that we're giving the reader ample time to do all of these things. The other thing that I noticed about this scene is there are a lot of players in this scene. We've got Xander, who is the doctor who's treating Noah, Nora's brother, twin. We've got Iris, who seems to be Xander's like assistant. So am I right there?
Liam's assistant. So
Liam's
Xander,
assistant.
Xander and Kira both work for the same company, and Xander and Kira are visiting. And Xander is actually doing a research trial. So Nora and Noah, basically, this is their first day for talking to either of them.
Okay. So then who's Liam?
Liam is the director of the Creative Brain Institute, which is the location where they're at, and that is Nora's boss. And he's also Nora's dad's best friend.
Okay. So we've got Xander and Iris and Liam and Noah and Nora. And then we bring in Kira. And then we bring in the Riley, who's like the security agent. Mm-hmm. And Riley brings in the messenger, Emil Brayson. Mm-hmm. And then Riley and Brayson leave, but we still have this big cast of Noah and Nora and Xander and Iris and Liam and Kira. So that's a lot of people in one scene to keep straight. Mm-hmm. Now, if the scene really calls for all these people, I say go for it. But as Kira and Nora start talking, especially as Kira starts like digging into Nora's research and is about to give her this news like, hey, I want you to come work for me, that feels like a conversation that wouldn't typically happen in front of an audience, especially if Kira and Xander's agency and organization is like super hush hush. So that gives you a really nice out to excuse some of the people from the room if you want to. Mm-hmm. See, here's the thing, as the author, you get to make all the decisions that you want to make. So if you really feel like, no, it makes sense that they're all there because Kira wants this big audience or whatever the reasoning is, that's completely okay. But if you want the reader to really focus in on this like volleying of the technical language between Kira and Nora, then you want to make that pod as small as possible for talking to them. And I can show you throughout the draft a couple of places where you can have that transition happen to make it really make sense. I did like the place where when the messenger comes in, Noah really like tries to protect Nora. The body language there was really, really great. But again, I had questions because a lot of the language in the conversation around that is, this person really shouldn't be here, but why is he here? So it almost felt to me like, as the reader, I was supposed to be worried, but instead of being worried about this, I was really confused as to why this security officer was like breaking protocol in this situation. And that never really kind of got resolved for me. So basically what I'm saying is you've got a lot of really good, really important plot points here. Like you mentioned, this is like 8 chapters in. We've set the stage. Now we're about to change the game. But I couldn't enjoy the change of the game because I wasn't sure where I was supposed to like, who am I supposed to be rooting for? Am I supposed to be rooting for Nora? Am I supposed to be rooting for Kira? Right? Like, where are my alliances supposed to be? So what I want to do is I want to kind of talk through, now that I have an idea of what you're thinking, I want to first put in some like natural breaking points, kind of the way that you were talking about, which scene is which scene. Let's start there, and then we can talk about the emotional flow, because what we want is we want an emotional high coming from one scene leading us into the arc of the next scene, so that we can ratchet up the intensity and bring it down a little bit, but not too low that our reader is ready to be like, oh, I'm at the end of a chapter. Okay, it's time for me to do my laundry or go to bed or whatever. We want to keep them right at that edge of, oh, I really want to know what happens next. So it's actually really nice to get this many words because I can kind of see where you're going with it.
Awesome.
Make sense? Any questions before we start looking?
Oh, no question. Thank you.
Okay, sounds great. All right, so at the very beginning here, we have Nora's impatience. We have Xander on his phone. We've got Iris and Noah. Noah's kind of feeling the same as usual. And then we have Liam walk in. So if we take a break right in here, and let me track my changes here. And we break it here. So this is the follow-up to the procedure. And then we have intro to Kira. And then intro to Kira runs into, okay, so in this intro, Noah thinks he recognizes the woman as she approaches. Everyone's kind of reluctant to put their phones away. Liam does introductions to Nora and Noah, but now Iris kind of fades into the background at this point. Noah seems a little bit perturbed that he isn't recognized by the director because he's kind of famous, right?
Mm-hmm.
Okay, so he's kind of not recognized. And now we have Iris and Xander. Okay, Xander gets spelled differently in places. Okay,
Oh, whoops.
That's okay. That's all right. I do that all the time. I just wanted to make sure it wasn't a different name. Sorry, I have trouble with names and letters. Just what you want from your editor, right? Somebody who can't tell the difference between words. It's really embarrassing. And I feel like it's happened at least once in every one of these sessions I've done this week. I'm like, oh, let's just highlight that. Okay, so there's a little bit of suspicion. This is where you're talking about Kira's suspicion of Nora and is kind of dismissive. And then Noah like kind of comes to her aid. And then there's some back and forth between Kira and Xander, like they know something's going on. And then here we go. This is where the door opens and Riley walks in. Okay. So talk to me a little bit about Riley coming in. You said this is a really important part of the story. We never actually get to see what's on the paper.
That's coming up in a scene or two. So Nora and Noah are going to do some snooping and they're going to find that paper.
Okay. So, but this paper is really big and it's really important, correct?
Correct. Yes.
Okay. Does anybody else in the room other than Kira know how important this paper is?
Um, Xander does because Xander is mentally, genetically enhanced.
Okay.
So he actually can read minds. So as Kira reads it, he hears, what she's thinking about it. So he knows what's on that paper, and he's very interested in the contents of that paper for a different reason, because he's not exactly who Kira thinks he is.
Ooh, plot twist. Okay. Do we know that Xander is a mind reader at this point?
No, nobody
Okay.
does, not even Kira.
Not even Kira. Okay. Hence, he isn't who she thinks he is.
Yes.
Okay. So it takes us a page to get um, the messenger Brayson in. Nora's a little bit on edge. Priority message. We don't get priority messages in here. I was told to wait for a reply. She takes a minute. She reads it. Everybody shifts uncomfortably, waiting for this. Brayson demands a response. And then she's dismissed, and Riley walks out with him. And then we return to the main story. I'll just call this back to the main room with the original players. Okay, and then there's a whole lot of back and forth about kind of helping us learn about Nora's research. Now, is this really the first time we're learning about Nora's research?
No.
Okay. So this is pretty much repeat information for the reader.
Oh, well, no. So Tazafan and the neuro nanobots, like where she's letting her imagination run wild, that's
Mhm.
new. So that
Okay.
is, yeah,
Okay. So all of this is all new.
that's new. Yeah, and talking
Okay.
about the drug above. Yeah.
All right. And then we get in here and we get to the change in the story, which is okay, you're coming with me. And then this is like well, she can't go now. Maybe she can go. No, she can't. Yes, she can. And then it seems as though Kira says, here, you haven't read the fine print of your contract. You kind of have to go with me. But
Mm-hmm.
then Xander kind of slows things down and says, we need to give her a minute to make a decision. So it
Mm.
seems almost as if everybody's talking for Nora but Nora.
Ah. Mm-hmm.
Is that what we want here?
Uh, no, I don't think so. I
Okay.
would prefer for Nora to say no, clearly on her own.
Okay. So at the end of this, Nora's not going with Kira.
At the end of this scene. Mm-hmm.
Okay. All right. And her reason for not going is because she needs to stay here and she needs to help her brother.
She needs to, her father's missing. So
Okay.
she and Noah are headed into Liam's office to discuss that next about what to do. So she's not able to pack her bag and leave tomorrow for some mysterious place.
Okay. And what's this line that Kira's talking about the fine print in the contract? Is this what eventually makes her change her mind?
No, no.
Okay.
Um, Kira is going to bring Nora with her, regardless of Nora's acceptance or not of that. So Kira here is trying to strong arm her. I I don't even know if there's anything in the contract. I just kind of made that up as I went
Uh-huh.
along.
That's
Give her
fine.
something to try to strong arm Nora into it, because she didn't just immediately say yes. Kira is used to getting her own way. So she's not used to anybody saying no. So she just immediately flew to strong arm tactics.
Got it. Okay. So she's the director. She's used to, this is what we're doing, no pushback. Yes, ma'am. We just all go with it.
Mm-hmm.
Okay. And then Xander kind of steps in and gives a place for Nora to like give some space to think,
Mm-hmm.
kind of takes her side. Kira kind of apologizes. And then they all walk away saying, okay, we're going to come back together in 45 minutes because we got to keep this going. And then Liam, Iris, Noah, and Nora are the 4 left at the end. And they're like, I can't wait for everybody to leave.
Yes.
Okay. So knowing kind of what you want the reader to feel, let's talk about the placement of this scene with the interruption of the messenger. So presumably something in this message is what changes Kira's plan.
Mm-hmm.
So Kira's here to convince Nora or to just kind of see what's happening. Why is she here initially? And why does her plan change when she gets this letter?
So Kira is, she basically does a tour of all of the Creative Brain Institutes on Earth, like once or twice a year. So
Mm-hmm.
she and Liam have been flying from institute to institute around the globe. Sort of, she goes through everything, all the research that's being done, talking about research that's coming up. It's basically like a business trip to make sure everything's in order.
Okay. So when she initially gets there, she's not planning to take Nora. It's just hey, this is a routine trip for me.
Mm-hmm.
But then presumably something about Nora's importance is in the letter
Mm-hmm.
that we don't find out till later.
Mm-hmm.
And we won't spoil it for the listeners. So, okay. That makes a lot of sense. So if that's the case, why is Xander at this particular institute in this moment? Because doesn't he work for Kira?
So ostensibly he works for Kira, but he's kind of undercover. So he actually belongs to the Empire, which is the enemy of Kira's planet. So neither are from Earth. And Xander is undercover, specifically tasked with looking for a geneticist and looking for lost genetically altered embryos who are presumably grown into adults by now.
Okay. So we meet Xander in the scene before this, where they talk about research and about injecting Noah with nanobots.
We meet Sanders. He's been in the book now for a few chapters.
Okay. But this is our first introduction to Kira.
Yes.
And Xander and Kira know each other because they work together.
Correct. Yes.
Okay. So let's think about the transition between these two scenes a little differently to help orient the reader to what's about to happen and who this woman is, rather than Noah looking at her and thinking that she looks familiar, and then Liam kind of introducing. If there's some anxiety in this conversation in the follow-up to the procedure about we only have so much time, so maybe Nora, in this impatience for Xander to send her the research, because she's not mad that he hasn't sent her the research yet. He's mad that he performed the procedure basically without her consent.
Yes. Mm-hmm.
And does that come out in the scene before this?
Yes, it does. Yeah, they talk about informed consent, and how can you have informed consent when you're not able to ask questions about the research behind what you're doing.
Okay.
Yeah.
All right. And then this fact that there's a dark spot on Noah's neck, that's presumably from the injection,
Correct.
and he feels the same,
Yes.
right? Okay.
Feel any effects. Yeah.
All right. So this kind of feels like you had mentioned that this is kind of like the end of the scene before.
Mm-hmm.
Okay. And so they know that Liam is coming with Kira, or they don't know. This is a surprise.
They so they're there to meet with Liam, and they don't know Kira's schedule, so they know she's in the building and spending most of the day with Liam, but they don't know that she's in the office with Liam, in the inner office.
Okay. So my recommendation is the inner office door opens. She heard the click of high heels, but didn't look up. Her phone vibrated. She opened the email. The message was a list of links. She tapped the first one. Okay. So this is a lot of things happening on her phone, but somebody new is walking in, right? And we're hearing this from Nora's perspective. The fact that high heels are coming into the room is pretty suspicious, because seemingly Liam is the only other one who's going to come into the room, and perhaps he doesn't wear high heels.
Mm-hmm.
Maybe he does. I don't know, but it seems as though like this is something new. So perhaps it's before she was able to open the email, the inner office door opened and she heard the clicking of high heels, right? Like somebody walks in the room, you're typically going to look up, right? Mm-hmm. This fact that, and we never actually get to see the link. So I would say, like, don't tease us with the link if you're not going to tell us what's in it.
Okay.
Now I
is
want.
in the next scene.
Would you say?
That is in the next chapter.
Okay, so then in the next chapter, start the next chapter with, now that she's finally alone, she's able to open the email and see the link.
Okay.
Like go ahead and leave that suspicion for us, right? Mm-hmm. Noah being the first person to speak, she looks a little familiar. Actually, let's put her the click of a high heels from a tall, attractive woman who looked to be in her early 40s and reluctant to put down her phone. Noah nudged her with his elbow and said softly, "She looks familiar." Noah said, "Nora, no, I'd like you to meet Director Kira Talbridge of Longley Enterprises. Director Talbridge, this is Dr. Nora Hawkins, one of our promising young neuroscientists. We also need to introduce Noah and her brother." I'm just going to editorial liberty this. You'll go back and make changes to it. Okay. Who is currently a patient here. And Xander and Iris, right? Unless you want Iris and Xander to leave the room at the following of the procedure. So it's just the two of them together here. That's how you can like minimize the number of people in the scene. Mm-hmm. Nora held out her hand. "Pleasure to meet you, Director Talbridge." The director barely grazed her hand and said "charmed" in a tone that suggested she was anything but. So now you've got this director who's used to kind of getting her way. Mm-hmm. But you also, like, how do you want the reader to feel about her? The fact that she doesn't want to put away her phone, The fact that she's not really charmed by Nora makes us kind of feel like she's a bad person.
Um, yes. Well, so director Trowbridge, she's kind of haughty, and I don't think she should be liked by the by the reader per se.
Okay. So this in here, this part about her barely shaking hands and then requiring that Noah gets an introduction feels a little bit beneath her.
Okay.
So if you really want that kind of haughty, I don't really have time for you
Hmm.
from this, um, then I would recommend that you shorten this, because again, the purpose of this scene is getting us into the fact that we don't like the director. The director feels like this is going to be yet another, because it feels to me like the way you've explained it is that the director has been to every one of these companies looking for something, and every one of them is a failure, right? Like she's looking for something specific. If she's been traveling, oh, go ahead.
Oh, yes. So she's doing business as usual. So she's not looking for anything specific. It's Xander who is secretly looking for something specific, and he doesn't want Kira to know that he's looking for it. So she's just going institute to institute, and she's been doing this for years, but she's never deigned to meet any of the regular scientists who work there.
Mm-hmm.
She just basically spends her time with Liam, who's the director, and then Iris, who is the executive assistant, I guess.
Okay, so a why is this institute different? Why is she making the exception here?
Um, well, because she comes face to face with Nora and Noah in Liam's outer office. So Liam walks out with her. Nora and Noah are waiting there, right there in her face, and Liam introduces her. So she's going to be polite enough to acknowledge that they're there, but not interested enough to really talk to them.
Okay, so that changes the whole scene then.
Mm.
Because to me, the way I was envisioning this as the reader is they're all sitting in this procedure room, and Liam is bringing Kira into the procedure room
Oh,
in order to, but that's not what you're saying is happening.
no,
This
no.
is actually a chance meeting.
Yes.
Okay, that then let's forget all of this that I suggested here.
I thought that was good though, the way you changed it.
Oh, well, I can keep it and then we can do a different.
Because like what you said about the email, like opening up the email and not being able to, that was perfectly valid, that I shouldn't be wasting the reader's time with that yet, for instance.
Yeah, you wanna give us like, so as a writer, you want the reader to anticipate things, but
Mhm.
you want the gratification of that anticipation to happen pretty quickly, unless it's really intended to be like the core part of the story. So the fact that Noah and Nora have a secret
Mhm.
and their dad is missing, that's the anticipation you want us waiting on. You don't want us waiting on the links to the emails. You don't,
Got it.
I mean, even the paper I'd say is kind of on the cusp of whether or not but it's important, and we're going to learn it because Noah and Nora do some sleuthing.
Mhm.
So I would say that go ahead and leave that.
Mhm.
Okay, so then at the end of this, Xander slips his phone into his pocket and nodded to Nora as he left the room.
But it is important for Xander to be in the next scene.
Okay, so he left the room. to get his laptop from Liam's office. I don't know, or left the room and went into Liam's adjoining office or something along those lines. All right, so then presumably Nora is going to take Noah home at this point, correct?
No. No. So Nora works here, and
Mm-hmm.
Xander has just, or sorry, her brother Noah has just finished filming in Australia. So he's in town visiting her. So he came to the institute to be part of kind of like a public lecture, almost like, but it was by invitation.
Mm-hmm.
That Xander is trying to locate, certain people. And so
Mm-hmm.
at each institute he's going to, he's holding like these invitation only lecture events.
Mm-hmm.
So Noah just came in for that. After this scene, they're going to go to lunch, and then they're going to do some snooping in the office that Kira's using the building. So Noah will be in the building probably
Okay.
for most of the rest of the day.
Okay. So are you ready for lunch? I'm starving. Noah nagged his sister as she went to open her email. And then maybe she says, again, total editorial liberties, just placeholder. You're always starving, but fine. I guess I can read this after lunch.
Mhm.
So then they leave the office, and I don't know, they're like, I would make it like a cross point, like they're getting ready to get on the elevator as Liam gets off the elevator, or they're walking down a corridor and they cross paths with him. And instead of saying, instead of Noah, ooh, that's not what I want to do. Instead of Noah saying this, that she looks a little bit familiar, or that we hear the high heels, Liam can be like, Nora, Noah, oh, good timing. He said he flagged them down in the hallway. I also can't type. I can't spell. I can't use letters. I can't type. Like something that shows that Liam wants to introduce them, but the director doesn't have any interest. And perhaps she says, does she call Liam Liam, or does she call him by his doctor name?
Oh, that's a good question.
Okay.
I think she calls him Liam
Okay.
because
So
she's above.
she's in a hurry. Liam, we really don't have time for this. I'd like to debrief with Xander before whatever we're going to do. And then perhaps Liam says, this will only take a moment. You're going to want to meet Dr. Hawkins. She's one of our promising young neuroscientists. Right? So you kind of take this information and make it like he's insisting, because
Mhm.
now we as Nora and Noah are like, we're thinking about lunch. And
Mhm.
here's this director who's like our dad's best friend. We feel a little bit obligated to like do what he says. So now you're emotionally drawing us as the reader into the importance of who this woman is, right? Because presumably Liam is looking out for Nora's best interest in
Mhm.
trying to get her research recognized, right? He's kind of her mentor. Did I remember that correctly?
Um, yes, he's her mentor, but he's leery of Kira paying too much attention to Nora, which is why in this scene he's not like enthused about the job offer, because he knows the secret of Nora and Noah, and he knows
Mm-hmm.
that if people find out about this secret, that it could be detrimental to both of them, which he
Mm-hmm.
explicitly talks about in the next scene, which is they had scheduled a meeting with him to talk about their missing father, to show him the video that their father left.
Mm-hmm.
So I don't know that he would go out of his way to try to introduce them like if they were passing in the hall or something. But
Okay.
Norm and Noah are go they've entered his executive office suite specifically to meet with him to talk about their missing dad. And he walks out of his inner office with Kira. Now they're face to face, and he has to introduce them, even though
Okay.
he's not really thrilled about it.
Okay. So, all right. So then maybe are you ready for lunch? You're always starving. Fine. Um, but let's talk to Liam before we go, because they're waiting for information from Liam, right?
Yeah, they need to come up with a game plan for what to do about their missing dad. Yeah.
Okay. Because the way this keeps unfolding, I keep getting confused as to when and why they're being introduced, because it
Yes.
seems to me like Kira's not interested in meeting them. So if she's not interested in meeting them, and the fact that Liam isn't interested in introducing her to them because Liam's trying to keep this kind of wall around them, the whole scene of the introduction feels unnecessary. But
Fair.
it needs to happen. So that's really important. So if you make it so that they are walking in on the director instead,
Mm,
that makes a ton of sense.
okay. Yes, I see exactly what you're saying. That's a good idea.
Okay, so in which case, I would recommend cutting a
Mhm.
lot of the first part of this scene. All
Definitely.
of the niceties, all of the like,
Yeah.
it's a pleasure to meet you, charmed. Who are you? I would recommend cutting all of that. Perhaps it's even they walk in. So
Mhm.
Nora and Noah walk in, and Xander and Kira are talking off to the side. So they begin having a conversation with Liam and don't even see Kira and Xander right away, or something along
Yeah.
those lines.
Yeah, so when they walk in, they're kind of like in a reception area, which is Iris's domain. So now when they walk in, Iris isn't there. So they're like, "Oh, it's time for our meeting with Liam. Let's go into Liam's office." So they walk into Liam's office, and there is Kira and Xander with Liam.
Perfect. Yes, that works really well, especially if they're used to just walking right into Liam's office if Iris isn't there.
Mhm.
Now you've made much smaller the number of people who are there.
Mhm.
Now you can have Liam's reluctance. So Liam can say, Nora, Noah, I forgot, he stuttered. We're supposed to have a meeting today. I'm so sorry. I'm going to need to reschedule. And then Xander can say, oh, Noah, I don't know, again, editorial liberties. How are you feeling after your procedure? And Noah, who is in your character chart, you've identified that he's like nice to everybody, charming to a fault, answers however he's feeling. And then maybe he tries to charm Kira and is like, who is your, I don't know, beautiful colleague? And she's like not interested. The tall woman rolls her eyes. Xander introduces, this is my colleague or my boss, however he's going to say it. Right? And now the introduction is made. Now Liam says, yes, yes. Let me walk you out, Nora, Noah. Trying to rush them out. Now they're confused as to like, now for me as the reader, now I'm like, who's this woman? Why isn't, right? Like now I'm in the moment. Now I want to know who this woman is, right? So now if you take all of this out, now I'm really in the moment of who this woman is and the fact that she doesn't want anything to do with them. Liam is trying to put a wall between them. Xander is the one, because at this point, Xander clearly knows something about them. So Xander like trying to make the introduction despite Liam, right? Like now as the reader, I'm hearing what you as the writer are trying to make me feel, which is like, there's more to this story and I want to stay to get to the bottom of it, even though Liam is like, nope, nope, there's the door, right? So then the next thing you can do with this scene is, again, you'll want to speed all of this up because really the important part of this scene is the conversation between Nora and Kira about the research, right? Like presumably there's something on the paper, or we as the reader are supposed to think that there's something on the paper that says Nora is really important because of her research, right? Now that I've kind of peeked behind the curtain a little bit, my guess is it's probably less about her research and more about her secret, but right, like that's okay. So when we get to this scene with Riley entering, there's this whole conversation about Riley breaking protocol for this other person who we don't actually even get to meet for an entire page. So my recommendation here is Liam is trying to usher Nora and Noah out into the front office to get them as far away from Kira as possible when they run right smack into Riley and the second person. Instead of Riley saying that there's this person who's not supposed to be here, whose name we weren't supposed to get, is he armed? Rather than all of that language, Riley enters and says, Dr. Steiner, that's Liam's name, right? So is it Liam Steiner?
Yes, it is. I had to think for a
Okay.
moment.
So they walk out. So Liam ushers out Nora and Noah and runs into Riley. And then I would give, have we met Riley before?
We have, yes.
Okay, great. And then instead of all of this, where somebody's waiting outside, so Riley and a second man they didn't recognize. Maybe you put something in about his, oh, that wasn't a word. Maybe you put something in about his uniform or what he's wearing, something that shows okay, so then this all can go. Again, what I'm trying to do here is get us as the reader to the important information as quickly as possible. So Dr. Steiner, this man has an urgent message for Director Talbridge, right? Kira is not necessarily, right? Like Kira's in the other room. You brought somebody up without checking his ID. This feels like it's totally against protocol. Nobody would say this, but the fact that he's armed perhaps maybe a descriptor with his gun. And then maybe Riley, when Riley is saying this, Riley's body language is telling us that Riley doesn't trust this man. So keeping, what pronoun does Riley use?
She.
Okay. Keeping her body between the stranger and Liam. Right? Like maybe even with her hand on her weapon. Right? Like something to show us that Riley is nervous about this person rather than having this conversation about he's armed, Liam was nervous, right? But you can still leave this body language of Noah stepping in front of Nora, right? Like watching the interaction, Noah steps in front, right? Like that makes a lot of sense because it keeps us in the moment. But all of these things are happening really, really quickly now. Perhaps now Grayson says, sorry, I'm trying to like find where, okay, Kira says, Grayson, why are you here? You can kind of pick and choose what in here. Oops. Find the emotional triggers. That's such like negative language, but you know what I mean? Like anything that's going to make us feel like this is important. And then Brayson, again, because we're not really supposed to like him, can butt in. The man interrupted. Where is she? This is a priority. And then maybe maybe Liam hesitates again at this moment and is like, uh, can I see some identification or, something in it for the delay so
Mhm.
that like he just like kind of pushes past and barges in, which is
Mhm.
why Nora and Noah and Liam don't leave, right? Like there has to be a reason because
Uh,
Liam's trying to get them out of here, but at the same time, like she's the reason why. So maybe what you even want it to do is like Liam gets them out of here, and Liam's like, fine, they're in my office, and they're walking down the hallway. We don't see the letter. And a few minutes later, Riley and the man come back out while they're, I don't know, waiting for the elevator and are like, Dr. Steiner, uh, Director Talbridge needs to see you and um, whatever Nora's last name is, Dr.
Hawkins.
Yes,
Yeah.
back in your office immediately. And like now Liam is between a rock and a hard place, right? Like I don't want them to see her, but now she's calling me, right? Like, so we don't necessarily have to see that there was a message or a letter. I mean, we can see it in Brayson's hand, or he can say, but something that shows us that there's some tension there, because when I read it the first time, it
Mhm.
made me feel like Liam was proud of Nora and really wanted to like elevate her status so that when they started into this interrogation, it was a good thing, that like this is a really good opportunity. But what you want to make it for us as the reader is like, no, this isn't a good thing. Does that make sense?
It does, yes.
Okay. Are the edits that I gave you, were they helpful to kind of get you where you wanted to be with the scene?
Yes, definitely. I think this flows a lot better and it makes a lot more sense. And I can see like after we talked about it, it seems very obvious to me. But it's so hard when you're in the middle of writing something to step back and see it.
It is. And this is where working with an editing partner can be really helpful, especially when you're focused on telling the story, because in your mind, you know where the scene is leading.
Mhm.
This scene is leading to the fact that Nora's getting this really big opportunity.
Mhm.
But you as the writer also know that this really big opportunity, in air quotes, is actually maybe a trap, maybe it is really a good opportunity for us, but we want her to be scared and hesitant, right? Like, so thinking about that emotion and how we get there, it's one of the things that I've learned in working with authors is they have all this knowledge in their head that when they're telling the story, they're telling the pieces of the story that they think the reader needs. But in essence, sometimes when the reader comes in and looks at it and is like, wait, where are they? Why is it, what am I supposed to be feeling? That conversation about, well, and you heard it took us 2 or 3 edits to get to the place where what's really at the heart of this part of the story? What's the emotion that we want to feel? Especially in a scene like this, because you have so many characters who are all converging. It really feels like all of your main characters. Now, I don't know your whole story, but you've got Liam, who's kind of the connection to the missing dad. You've got Nora and Noah, who are the protagonists. You've got Xander, who's like the secret agent, maybe antagonist. You've got Kira, who is the director, who maybe is appearing to be the antagonist. And then you've got Brayson, who's the messenger, who's going to play this huge part later on. You have all of these forces kind of converging, which means you as the writer kind of see these events unfolding maybe more slowly, or you want us as the reader to kind of hold on to that anticipation. So like kind of really thinking through strategically how these roles play together can be really important. One of the suggestions that I make as it relates to really understanding a scene like this if you were to be editing on your own. Because in an ideal situation, you would have somebody, a beta reader, a friend, an editor, somebody reading the scene with a positive but critical eye, right? Like excited and enthusiastic about your story, but also this understanding of like, what's the purpose of this scene? If you don't have that person, or if you want to do an edit before you get to that person, the questions that I like to ask about a scene are, why is this scene important? What is it that I want the reader to know? Just like you and I started at the beginning of this, where we were kind of talking about what are the beats of the scene? What do we want the emotions? But beyond that, the question always has to be, what's the point of this scene? Why does my reader need to see this particular scene? And the reason the reader needs to see this particular scene is because we're trying to see the fact that we don't want Nora to go on this really great opportunity, right? We want to see that Liam is trying to keep her away from Kira. We want to see that Xander's trying to keep her away from Kira. And we want to see Kira being like, why are you people getting in my way? She just needs to say yes, right? Like that's really the crux of what we want to get to. So getting us there as quickly as possible helps with the emotions from the reader of this, like, but wait, versus the, let me tell you this part of the story, and let me tell you this part of the story, and let me tell you this part of the story. You just kind of keep it all quick when you're talking about an emotionally intense scene. There are lots of opportunities, and there are going to be lots of opportunities in your story where you want to slow the story down. For example, when you're talking between Kira and Nora about like the science of things, right? Like these are important elements where you can slow the story down and really get into some of the details about the drug. The thing I'm going to recommend, and we're kind of running low on time, so I don't want to go line by line in here, but I do want to recommend in here that you find a way to make the science of this really, really interesting for us as the reader. Did you ever watch The West Wing?
For a little while, long time ago.
Okay, so yeah, long time ago. So The West Wing is a political drama, and yet you don't have to be a political analyst to be able to understand what they're talking about, because they're always talking about politics like it's impacting everyone's life in the immediate moment. And it makes the writers always make them sound like they know what they're talking about, even though maybe a political analyst listens to it and is like, no, that's not how politics go. It happens in medical dramas all the time too, right? Like they're throwing out, do this CBC Chem 7 stat, and a medical professional is like, nobody would order a CBC Chem 7 for this, right? Like this is an X-ray situation, right? Like that's the kind of thing that you want to do as you're talking about the science of this. So in this language here, like this, for starters, access to this drug that I'm not even going to pretend to pronounce because I can't. Go ahead. Will you say it for me, please?
Tazofan.
Tazofan. Okay. See, that's exactly what that says on the page, and yet my brain could not make words out of that. Tazofan. Yep, that's exactly what it looks like, right? Like so this drug here, and you have Noah in the room. So
Mhm.
Noah can actually be the person who like explains to the reader
Mm.
these words. So like, for example, Nora is probably not going to say a drug which shows promise for clearing away the plaques and tangles that cause memory loss for Alzheimer's, because she's kind of testing Kira. So they can be talking like scientist to scientist. So Kira can say something like, "What hurdles are you facing?" And Nora can say, "Access to Tazepam." And um, Noah can elbow Xander and be like, "That's the drug that shows promise for clearing away the plaques and the tangles that cause the memory loss for Alzheimer's." And everybody can be like, "Yeah, we all know that. Thank you." Right? Like, so he can be the one who's like in the cop dramas where somebody says, "Put out an APB," and they're the person who's like, "That all points bulletin has just gone out to all the other police officers," right? Like, you can have him, especially because you've created this gregarious character who you can use it for us as the reader, which can keep the kind of elevated technical language between Kira and Nora happening very rapidly.
Mhm.
And the excitement, you can have that continue to build. So it feels like it feels for us watching the West Wing, where we might not have any idea how politics really happens, but we're super engaged because they're talking about things that feel really important. And we have somebody who's going to translate what that means for everyday life in Xander. And you can have it go the other way too, right? Like, so in this case, Noah probably knows what Tazephen is because he's heard Nora talk about it a million times. But when they get in here and she says, "I need access to neuro nanobots that can deliver both, instead of medication and electrical stimulation to the precise areas of the brain," maybe you turn that around and you use your knowledge of the brain to say specifically the prefrontal cortex and the amygdala and Broca's area or whatever it is that you want. So it gets really technical, and Leah, or excuse me, Noah starts to look really confused, and Liam takes pity on him and leans over and whispers in his ear, "That's blah 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 blah," or "That's the part of the brain that does this," right? So like you're getting, because think about the way medical professionals and scientists talk about science, right? They use really sciency words,
Yes.
which not a very sciencey word. And they get really excited about it, and they like, it's almost as if they're speaking a foreign language. So
Mhm.
if you can give us that sense, it will make us as the reader really feel like Kira and Nora know what they're talking about. And it'll give us as the reader this moment of like, "Oh yeah, this is a good match. They should work together," right? Because maybe they're finishing each other's sentences, maybe they're one-upping each other. Maybe Nora says, "I need neuro nanobots that do blah blah blah," and then Kira's the one that says, "Are you trying to reverse the memory loss with blah blah blah?" And Nora's like, "Well, we did a study last year that showed there was a 7% reduction in blah, 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 and a 14% increase in yada, yada." And then Kira can say something like, "What about the side effects of this, that, and the other?" And they like start getting like really into the noise. And then maybe it's Liam or Xander that's like, ladies, excuse me, can we really need to get you back on schedule or something," because neither one of them really want Nora to be in this conversation. So if Nora starts getting excited about it, they need to kind of be the ones that back her down. So then when you get to this place where Kira's like, we can do this. We can do this work together. Then Nora can be like, okay, well, when can you get me these things? So it can be the same ending of this, like, no, I'm not going with you. But this, we want also to see this desire that this looks like kind of an attractive thing for her until we find out that she has to leave tomorrow and she can only be here once or twice a year, which is kind of the sticking point, or feels like it might be the sticking point, especially because her dad's missing and that sort of thing.
Yeah, that's awesome. That's great.
Okay. What questions do you have for me?
Oh boy, I don't know that I have any. I don't think I have any questions. This is great. I took so many notes. I definitely feel like I have a more clear idea of how to get my point across, like what I want the reader to take away from it,
Mm-hmm.
but do it in a completely different way. You know, keeping elements of it, but just changing the position, taking some people out, speeding
Mm-hmm.
some things up, slowing some things down. And it's really helpful to get your perspective on what should be sped up and what should be slowed down, because I think it's
Mm-hmm.
the opposite of what I was doing.
And that's a really common thing for writers, because especially writers who are creating an entire world around what's happening in their story. We have this tendency to think, and it's not just, I say writers, but it's not just writers. So like, when I tell a story to my spouse, I want to tell him every single detail. I want him to know who was in the room and what their hair looked like, and what it smelled like. And he's like, what happened? I'm like, oh, well, somebody got asked this question and it was really funny. And he's like, what does their hair have to do with that? Like, well, nothing. I'm just setting the scene for you, right? Like I have all these details because I feel like I want him to be in the moment with me.
Yes.
And really he just wants the punchline.
Yes.
So like kind of thinking about the story in that way of like, how do we take the most important, most emotionally salient part of the story, bring that all the way to the top, focus on that, and build on top of that. You may want to think about, as you're drafting, I know you've been trying to draft some dialogue only scenes as it relates to the Slack channel. I've seen some of your scenes in there, and it's always fun to read what everybody posts in there. As you're thinking about the dialogue only scenes, thinking about what does the reader need to know? What's like the most important part? What's the punchline? Starting there, because you can add all day long to your scenes. Sometimes when you have a scene, now you can take away all day long too, but it hurts to take away a scene. You put all this effort and all this love and all this energy into a scene. And I can see how it can be disheartening for me to come in and be like, so this is really good, but I want to get from here to here in like 2 exchanges instead of a page and a half, right? Like I can see that being disheartening because you put so much love and art into your work. So kind of thinking about building the pieces just a little bit differently. So, and not all scenes. I say that like with a blanket broad stroke. There are scenes where you want to stay really in the moment and you want to slow the reader down and you want them to live in that moment. And those are the emotionally heavy scenes, right? Like if you have a love story or if you have a tragedy, those moments of tragedy and triumph, like you really want to be there and you want to slow things down when you're trying to get to like something's about to happen, right? Like if you think about television, they spend 40 minutes of a TV show building up to the big arc, and then like the 4 minutes before the end happens super, super, super fast because they want to build your anxiety so that they cut you off on a cliffhanger so you come back the next week. And then the next week, they resolve that cliffhanger in 2 minutes. They spend 38 minutes slow and steady character development because they want you emotionally engaged with the character, but then they want you to come back the next week. So they're going to speed that last 4 minutes of the show up. And that's where you are right now. You're right at the part where you're going to cut them off for the TV commercial or the end of the episode, right? Like Kira's going to invite Noah to go on this trip with her. Nora's I think I just said Noah. I apologize. Nora's going to go on this trip. Nora's really excited about going on this trip, but oh, wait, I got to be away from my family for all this time. What do I do? Dun, dun, dun. Scene can close there. We have to wait till next week, right? So
I
just
don't have her say no.
I'm sorry.
I don't have her say no at the end
Oh
of
no,
this.
you in this case you can, but
Okay.
it's that emotional moment of like, I have this really big opportunity. And you know, there's nothing wrong with ending a scene with her saying, really, you're going to offer me this job? And Kira says, well, yeah, but we leave tomorrow and we probably won't be back for 6 months. So can you get your affairs in order that quickly? And Nora being like, oh, right. And then turn the page, and then Xander and Xander and Liam and Noah at the very first line of the next page are like, you can't do that. No, no, no. Right. Like, as the writer, you have the ability to chop a scene anywhere you want. But you want to think about how it's going to emotionally impact the reader if you do that. So not really knowing what happens next, it's hard to judge where I would cut this scene. But I would definitely say, if you make the changes that we've talked about here, this actually all does become one scene because it flows much faster than it did in the original.
Yes.
So,
yes, I see that. Yeah,
all
this
right.
is great, Laura. Thank you so much.
Sounds good. I'm going to go ahead and turn the recording off.
Okay.
So I always have to turn the share off before I can find the stop recording.
Okay.